There was a time when Palestine gave land to Israel. Today, that same land is a battlefield of broken dreams and unending conflict. Are you ready to uncover the truth that history tried to bury? The land before the conflict is shared history. Before the headlines, before the wars, before the borders drawn in blood, there was a land known simply as Palestine. Nestled at the crossroads of Africa, Asia, and Europe, this sacred land has been home to a multitude of cultures, empires, and faiths for thousands of years. From the Canaanites and Philistines to the Israelites, Romans, Byzantines, Arabs, Ottomans, and British, the land of Palestine has always been a melting pot of civilizations. In the early centuries, Jews, Christians, and Muslims lived side by side in relative peace, sharing the land, the markets, and the sacred spaces. Jerusalem, the crown jewel of the region, was revered by all three Abrahamic religions. While tensions existed, as they do anywhere history runs deep, there was no fixed line that divided the land by race or religion. But everything began to change in the late 1800s. Europe was witnessing a rise in anti-Semitism, and many Jewish intellectuals and political leaders began to dream of a homeland of their own. This dream gave birth to the Zionist movement, an ideology that called for the return of Jews to what they considered their ancestral homeland, Palestine. This was not just a spiritual return, it was a political plan. And while Jews had always been part of Palestine's population, the idea of a new Jewish state on Palestinian land began to ignite fear and anxiety among the Arab majority. Palestinians had lived there for generations. Their farms, homes, mosques, and churches were not just buildings, they were pieces of identity, stitched into the very soil. At the time, Palestine was under Ottoman rule. But as World War I reshaped global empires, the Ottoman grip on the region weakened. In 1917, a single document would set the stage for a century of unrest. The Balfour Declaration, a letter from Britain's Foreign Secretary promising a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. But here's what most people forget. In that same declaration, Britain also promised that the rights of existing non-Jewish communities, meaning the Palestinians, would not be harmed. Two promises, one land, a recipe for conflict. The British Mandate and growing tensions. After World War I, the Ottoman Empire officially collapsed, and the League of Nations granted Britain control over Palestine. This period became known as the British Mandate 1920 to 1948. At first, it seemed like Britain would act as a neutral force, managing both Arab and Jewish interests fairly. But quickly, things became complicated. Jewish immigration from Europe began to increase, especially after the horrors of the Holocaust in the 1930s and 40s. Each boat that docked in Haifa or Jaffa brought more families seeking refuge, a home where they could live free from persecution. But to the Palestinians, these new arrivals weren't just survivors, they were settlers. Imagine watching your homeland change before your eyes. Your neighbor's farm sold to a foreign organization. Your city renamed. Your culture slowly pushed aside. As Jewish communities expanded, often purchasing land from absentee landlords in Europe, Palestinian farmers were evicted. Tensions boiled over. In 1929, violence broke out in Hebron and other cities, with bloodshed on both sides. By the mid-1930s, Palestinians had launched a full revolt against British rule and increasing Jewish immigration. The Arab Revolt of 1936 to 1939 was brutally suppressed by the British, with over 5,000 Palestinians killed, countless homes demolished, and leaders exiled or arrested. Meanwhile, Jewish militias like Haganah, Irgun, and Lehi were forming in response. Their goal? Defend Jewish settlements and, eventually, push for an independent Jewish state. So by the end of World War II, Palestine was a land on edge. Two communities, each with a deep history and trauma, now stood face to face, both believing they had a right to the same land. In 1947, the United Nations offered a solution that would change everything: the UN Partition Plan and the birth of Israel. By 1947, Britain was exhausted and overwhelmed. After 3 decades of managing the mandate and facing constant unrest, the British decided to walk away from Palestine. They handed the matter over to the newly formed United Nations, hoping it could solve the crisis. The UN solution: divide the land. The UN Partition Plan proposed that Palestine be split into 2 states, one Jewish and one Arab. Jerusalem would be placed under international control, given its religious significance to Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. But here's the twist. Jews made up roughly 33% of the population at the time, yet the plan awarded them 55% of the land. The remaining 45% went to the Arab Palestinians, even though they were the majority. To many Palestinians, this wasn't a peace offering, it was a betrayal. How could land that had been theirs for generations suddenly be handed away? How could they accept a plan that erased villages, livelihoods, and their right to self-determination? While the Zionist leadership accepted the plan, the Arab League and Palestinian leaders rejected it. They argued that it was unjust and colonial in nature, another European decision made without the consent of the indigenous population. Despite the rejection, on May 14, 1948, something historic happened. From a modest building in Tel Aviv, David Ben-Gurion declared the establishment of the State of Israel. For Jews around the world, this was a moment of triumph, a homeland reborn after 2,000 years of exile and persecution. But for Palestinians, it marked the beginning of something they would call al-Nakba, the catastrophe. Because immediately after Israel's declaration, neighboring Arab countries launched a war in defense of Palestine. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War had begun, and what followed was a mass displacement of unimaginable scale, the Nakba, the catastrophe of 1948. For Palestinians, 1948 wasn't just a year in history, it was the moment their world changed forever. When the State of Israel was declared and Arab nations responded with war, the conflict didn't just take place on the battlefield. It erupted in towns, villages, and homes across Palestine. Over the course of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, more than 750,000 Palestinians, over half the Arab population of the region, were forcibly displaced from their land. Entire villages were destroyed. Families who had lived in the same house for generations suddenly found themselves homeless, wandering across deserts and borders. This event became known as al-Nakba, or the catastrophe. The causes of the exodus are still debated. Some historians argue that Zionist militias expelled Palestinians through military operations like Plan Dalet. Others point to fear, chaos, and psychological warfare, spreading panic among villages with rumors of massacres. But the result was undeniable. The people scattered, a homeland lost. Cities like Haifa, Jaffa, and Lydda saw dramatic demographic shifts overnight. In some places, Palestinian residents were marched out at gunpoint. In others, they fled in fear after nearby attacks. The Deir Yassin massacre, where over 100 Palestinians were killed by the Irgun and Lehi militias, sent shockwaves across the region. Those who fled became refugees in neighboring countries like Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. Many believe they returned home in a few days, once the fighting stopped. But days turned into decades. To this day, millions of Palestinian refugees and their descendants live in camps or as stateless individuals, still carrying keys to homes that no longer exist. And while Israel celebrated its independence, Palestinians mourn their dispossession, marking the beginning of a conflict that has not been resolved to this day. Occupation and Resistance 1967 and beyond. 2 decades after al-Nakba, tensions in the Middle East had only grown deeper. The unresolved refugee crisis, border skirmishes, and ideological hostilities created a powder keg, and in 1967, it exploded. This was the year of the Six-Day War. In June 1967, fearing an imminent attack from neighboring Arab nations, Israel launched preemptive strikes. In just 6 days, Israel achieved a sweeping military victory, but it came with enormous consequences. Israel occupied vast new territories. The West Bank, including East Jerusalem from Jordan, the Gaza Strip and Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, the Golan Heights from Syria. The significance of this cannot be overstated. For Palestinians, the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza meant the loss of even the small portion of land they had left after 1948. Israel now controlled 100% of historical Palestine, and millions of Palestinians were living under Israeli military rule. Life under occupation was, and continues to be, harsh. Checkpoints, military raids, settlement expansions, and restrictions on movement became a daily reality for many Palestinians. In the face of this growing oppression, resistance movements began to emerge. In 1964, the Palestine Liberation Organization (PLO) was formed, with the goal of reclaiming Palestinian land and self-determination. Later, in the late 1980s, the First Intifada, a mass Palestinian uprising, swept through the West Bank and Gaza. Children threw stones at tanks. Workers went on strikes. The world began to take notice. But the response was brutal. Israel cracked down with force, leading to thousands of casualties and arrests. Yet through this resistance, Palestinians sent a message loud and clear. They had not forgotten. They would not be erased. At the same time, Israeli settlements began spreading across the occupied West Bank, small, fortified communities of Israeli citizens, often built on land that Palestinians considered theirs. These settlements, considered illegal under international law, became a source of endless tension, violence, and diplomatic conflict. And so, the occupation became not just a military presence, but a system, one that controlled land, resources, borders, and people. It turned everyday life into a constant negotiation of survival. The Oslo Accords, a glimmer of hope or false promise. By the early 1990s, after decades of bloodshed, both Israelis and Palestinians seemed weary of conflict. The First Intifada had drawn global attention to the plight of Palestinians, and the pressure on political leaders to find a peaceful resolution had intensified. Out of this tension came a moment of cautious hope, the Oslo Accords. In 1993, secret negotiations held in Norway between the Palestine Liberation Organization (PLO) and the Israeli government led to the signing of the Oslo Accord on the White House lawn, under the watch of U.S. President Bill Clinton. For the first time, Israel officially recognized the PLO as the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. And in return, the PLO recognized Israel's right to exist in peace. It was a handshake watched by the world, Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat, two men long seen as enemies standing side by side. The agreement outlined a roadmap: Palestinian self-governance in parts of the West Bank and Gaza Strip, the creation of the Palestinian Authority (PA), a 5-year timetable to resolve major issues like Jerusalem, settlements, refugees, and borders. It was called a peace process, but for many Palestinians, peace remained distant. While the PA was established and some control was transferred, the Israeli military occupation did not end. Checkpoints remained. Settlements continued to grow. Jerusalem remained under full Israeli control. For Israelis, the fear of security threats did not vanish either. Tensions and attacks continued, and political opposition to Oslo grew on both sides. In 1995, the fragile process was shaken by a seismic event. Israeli Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated by a far-right Israeli extremist opposed to the peace deal. The hopes tied to Oslo began to fade. By the time the Second Intifada erupted in the early 2000s, Oslo was seen by many as a failed promise. Palestinians felt betrayed by a process that, instead of granting them a state, had solidified their control under a new administrative authority with limited power. And yet, Oslo left behind a complex legacy. It created the framework that still defines much of the political geography of the region. It was the closest the two sides ever came to peace, but it wasn't enough. Hope had been kindled, but in the eyes of many, it had also been manipulated. Gaza under siege, the rise of Hamas, and humanitarian crisis. As the 21st century began, the situation in Palestine, particularly in Gaza, grew increasingly dire. The collapse of the Oslo process left behind deep frustration and mistrust. The promise of peace had not materialized, and daily life was growing more unbearable. In this environment of disillusionment and hardship, a new political force gained momentum: Hamas. Founded in 1987 during the First Intifada, Hamas was a Palestinian Islamic resistance movement that combined social services with a military wing. While the PLO sought negotiation, Hamas took a more hardline stance, opposing Israel's existence and advocating for armed resistance. In 2006, in a surprising and democratic election result, Hamas won a majority in the Palestinian Legislative Council. This sent shockwaves through the region and the world. The victory led to a power struggle between Hamas and Fatah, the PLO's dominant party. By 2007, Hamas had taken full control of Gaza, while Fatah retained authority in parts of the West Bank. What followed was a complete blockade of Gaza by Israel, with Egypt's cooperation. The reason? Israel cited security concerns, pointing to Hamas's rocket attacks. But for the people of Gaza, the blockade became a humanitarian nightmare. Electricity, only a few hours a day. Clean water, scarce. Medicine and food, limited. Unemployment soared. Poverty deepened. And the sense of being trapped in an open-air prison became the new reality for over 2 million Palestinians. In response to Hamas's rise and the blockade, wars erupted. 2008-9. Israel launched Operation Cast Lead, 2012. Another war escalated in November, 2014. A devastating 50-day conflict killed thousands. Each time, the majority of the casualties were Palestinian civilians, many of them children. International observers raised alarm. Human rights groups called it collective punishment. But the cycle of rockets and retaliation continued. For Palestinians in Gaza, Hamas is both a protector and a problem. For Israel, Hamas is both a threat and a justification for continued control. Caught in between, the people, men, women, and children, whose lives are shattered by every new round of violence. And yet, Gaza persists. Its people, despite the hardships, continue to survive. The questions remain: how long can this go on? Can peace ever grow in a land under siege? Settlements and separation, a divided land. While Gaza remained under blockade, another slow-burning crisis was unfolding in the West Bank, one that further complicated hopes for peace. After the 1967 Six-Day War, Israel began establishing settlements, communities built by Israelis on occupied Palestinian land in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. These settlements were supposed to be temporary, some claim. Others saw them as strategic. But over time, they grew steadily, systematically, and to Palestinians, provocatively. By the 2000s and beyond, over 600,000 Israeli settlers were living in these territories. So what's the issue? The settlements are considered illegal under international law, particularly the Fourth Geneva Convention, which prohibits an occupying power from transferring its own population into occupied territory. Yet Israel disputes this interpretation. It considers some areas, like East Jerusalem, as part of its eternal capital, and the rest as disputed territory open to negotiation. But for Palestinians, the growth of settlements felt like the stealing of their land, piece by piece. Farmland was confiscated, olive groves uprooted, access to water restricted, and most importantly, freedom of movement became limited. In the early 2000s, Israel began building a separation barrier, a massive wall and fence system stretching hundreds of kilometers, cutting deep into the West Bank. The official reason? Security, to prevent suicide bombings and attacks during the Second Intifada. But the reality on the ground, entire Palestinian villages were encircled, families were split, access to hospitals, schools, and farmland was blocked. The people already under occupation were now behind walls. Israel said the wall broke. It significantly reduced attacks. But to Palestinians, it became a symbol of apartheid, of being caged in their own land. Settler violence also increased. Reports of harassment, home demolitions, and attacks on Palestinian property became more frequent. And each new settlement was another blow to the dream of a two-state solution. How could a Palestinian state exist if the land was being carved up? Despite international condemnation, the settlement project continued. And with every passing year, the possibility of a viable, independent Palestine seemed to shrink. Today, the West Bank is a fragmented puzzle. Some areas under full Israeli control, others under limited Palestinian authority. Checkpoints, the roads, Israeli-only bypass roads run beside Palestinian towns, a once connected land now severed by walls, roads, and ideology. In this divided land, coexistence seems more distant than ever. But is there still hope? What will it take to break down the walls, not just of concrete, but of fear, resentment, and history? The role of the world, politics, power, and propaganda. In any major conflict, the role of the world matters, and the Israel-Palestine conflict is no different. But instead of bringing clarity or peace, global involvement has often deepened the divide, fueled resentment, and turned this human tragedy into a geopolitical battlefield. Let's begin with the United States. Since the creation of Israel, the U.S. has been its strongest ally, offering billions of dollars in military aid, advanced weaponry, and diplomatic support. Why? Some say it's shared democratic values. Others point to strategic interests in the Middle East. And then there's the influence of pro-Israel lobby groups like M.I.H. The result? At the United Nations, the U.S. has consistently vetoed resolutions critical of Israel, resolutions that condemn settlements, occupation, or military actions. This has left many Palestinians feeling abandoned by the international community. But not every country has supported Israel. Nations like Turkey, Iran, and South Africa have stood strongly with the Palestinian cause, while European countries have often tried to play the role of mediators, calling for peace, but hesitating to take strong actions. Meanwhile, the Arab world, once a vocal supporter of Palestine, has grown more silent over the years. Some nations, like Egypt and Jordan, signed peace treaties with Israel. Others, like the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco, normalized relations through the Abraham Accords in 2020. For many Palestinians, this felt like a betrayal. While they endured occupation, bombings, and checkpoints, Arab leaders were shaking hands and signing deals with their occupier. The media, too, plays a powerful role in shaping public perception. Western media often frames the conflict as balance, using terms like clashes or conflict as if both sides are equal in power and circumstance. But how can a people under military occupation for decades compete to one of the most advanced militaries in the world? Palestinian voices are frequently ignored, misrepresented, or silenced. Activists face censorship, journalists are detained or killed, and social media platforms remove posts calling for justice. At the same time, Israeli narratives dominate the conversation in many Western countries, painting the state as a victim of terrorism, defending itself from aggression. And yes, while security concerns are real, the story is rarely told from both sides. This one-sided narrative has led to a global misunderstanding of the situation, where those calling for Palestinian rights are branded as anti-Semitic, and those supporting Israel are seen as complicit in oppression. But truth doesn't belong to one side. Injustice, occupation, and violence, no matter who commits them, must be acknowledged and addressed. Only then can the world move from propaganda to truth, from silence to justice. The Israel-Palestine conflict is not just about land. It's about human rights, dignity, and historical accountability. And the world's silence or bias can either fuel the fire or help extinguish it. The human cost lives caught in the crossfire. Beneath all the politics, borders, and headlines lies the deepest truth of this conflict. The human cost. It's not about numbers. It's about lives. Real people, children, mothers, fathers, students, who've paid the price for decisions made far above them. In Gaza, where over 2 million Palestinians are confined within 140 square miles, life is a daily struggle. It's one of the most densely populated areas on Earth, with limited access to clean water, electricity, or healthcare. Years of blockades have turned Gaza into what many human rights organizations call an open-air prison. Bombings destroy homes in seconds. Families lose everything. Children grow up knowing war before they know peace. And it's not just Gaza. In the West Bank, checkpoints and the separation wall dictate daily life. Want to go to school? Pass through a checkpoint. Need medical care? Wait in line and hope for permission. Even olive trees, centuries old, are uprooted by settlers expanding into Palestinian villages. Palestinians live with the constant fear of home demolitions, arrests without charges, and violence from both military and settlers. And then there's East Jerusalem, where Palestinian families are slowly being forced out of their homes while settlements rise around them. It's a silent, creeping displacement, one home at a time. On the Israeli side, too, there is fear. Fear of rockets launched from Gaza. Fear of stabbings and attacks. Fear that peace is always out of reach. Children in southern Israel grow up running to bomb shelters, traumatized by sirens. Families mourn soldiers and civilians lost in attacks. The pain is real on both sides. But here's the truth. The suffering is not equal. One side is occupied, the other is occupied. One side lives under daily restrictions and bombardments. The other has one of the world's most powerful armies. Yet in the middle of it all, humanity survives. Palestinian parents still send their kids to school, dreaming of a better future. Israeli activists protest their own government's policy, standing in solidarity with Palestinians. Journalists, doctors, teachers, and ordinary citizens on both sides continue to believe in peace, even when the world has stopped believing. The cost of this conflict isn't measured in numbers. It's measured in lost childhoods, broken families, and generations born into pain. And unless we see the people behind the politics, we will never understand the full tragedy or the path to healing. Peace cannot come from ignoring pain. It begins when we listen, when we see, and when we dare to believe in justice for all. The roadblocks to peace, Why hasn't it ended yet? After decades of war, talks, broken truces, and international negotiations, why hasn't peace happened yet? It's a question that echoes across generations, from refugee camps in Gaza to parliaments in Europe. Let's understand the major roadblocks that keep this conflict alive. 1. Occupation and settlements. One of the biggest obstacles is Israel's continued occupation of Palestinian territories since 1967. In the West Bank and East Jerusalem, Israel continues to build illegal settlements, communities of Israeli citizens built on Palestinian land. These settlements are considered illegal under international law, but they keep growing. Every new settlement makes a future Palestinian state less and less possible. It's like trying to build a puzzle while someone keeps removing pieces. 2. Blockade of Gaza. Since 2007, Israel, with help from Egypt, has imposed a land, air, and sea blockade on Gaza. This blockade restricts goods, people, and even medical supplies from moving freely. As a result, Gaza's economy has collapsed. Unemployment is one of the highest in the world, and basic infrastructure is crumbling. This creates humanitarian crises that fuel anger and despair. 3. Status of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a holy city for Muslims, Jews, and Christians. Palestinians want East Jerusalem as the capital of their future state. But Israel claims all of Jerusalem as its eternal and undivided capital. This disagreement is one of the most emotional and difficult issues to resolve. 4. Refugees and the right of return. There are over 5 million Palestinian refugees registered with the UN. Many were displaced in 1948 and 1967, and their descendants still live in camps across the Middle East. They want the right to return to their ancestral homes, homes that are now part of Israel. Israel fears this would change the demographic makeup of the country and refuses. The result? A permanent refugee crisis with no solution in sight. 5. Leadership and divisions. On the Palestinian side, political leadership is divided. The West Bank is controlled by Fatah, while Hamas controls Gaza. These two groups often clash, weakening the Palestinian position in negotiations. On the Israeli side, governments have shifted increasingly to the right, often favoring military strength over diplomacy. 6. International involvement, or lack of it. The international community often makes statements of support, but rarely takes real action. Many countries continue to fund or arm Israel, while offering only symbolic support to Palestinians. Others fear getting involved due to political pressure or strategic alliances. Peace talks have been tried and failed, Oslo Accords, Camp David, the roadmap to peace, but without addressing the core issues, they've led nowhere. 7. Mistrust and trauma. After decades of violence, there's deep mistrust on both sides. Every broken promise, every airstrike, every attack deepens the wounds. Peace can't grow where trauma is still fresh and justice is still denied. So why hasn't it ended? Because the systems of occupation, power imbalance, and international silence continue. Because the suffering of Palestinians is ignored. Because the world looks away until the next explosion. But peace is still possible. It starts with truth, with acknowledging the pain, the history, and the injustice, and with demanding more from leaders, not just talks, but real change. Global reactions, how the world sees this conflict. The Israel-Palestine conflict isn't just a regional issue, it's a global flashpoint. From the United Nations to student protests in universities, this decades-long struggle has sparked fierce debate, diplomacy, and division around the world. But how does the world truly see this conflict? Let's explore how different countries, regions, and people have responded over time. 1. The United States. The powerful ally of Israel. The United States has long been one of Israel's strongest allies. Since 1948, the U.S. has provided Israel with billions in military aid, advanced weapons, and diplomatic support. In the United Nations, the U.S. has vetoed numerous resolutions condemning Israeli actions, especially when it comes to settlements or military operations. Many American politicians view Israel as a key ally in the Middle East, both for strategic and religious reasons. At the same time, growing numbers of young Americans, especially in universities and online platforms, are raising their voices in support of Palestinian rights. 2. European Union, calling for peace, struggling to act. European countries often express concern about Israel's settlement expansions and human rights violations, but their actions usually stop at strongly worded statements. Some countries, like Ireland, Spain, and Sweden, have been more vocal in recognizing Palestinian statehood. Others, like Germany and France, maintain strong trade ties with Israel and tread carefully. 3. Arab and Muslim world, support for Palestine. Divided in action, many Muslim-majority countries express deep solidarity with Palestinians. You'll often see widespread protests, emotional speeches, and calls for justice. Countries like Turkey, Iran, and Malaysia have strongly condemned Israeli actions and supported Palestinian causes. However, not all Arab nations have maintained a unified stance. Egypt and Jordan have official peace treaties with Israel. In recent years, countries like the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Morocco normalized relations with Israel under the Abraham Accords, angering many Palestinians. These diplomatic deals often prioritize economic or strategic interests over justice for Palestine. 4. The United Nations. Lots of resolutions, little enforcement. The UN has passed numerous resolutions condemning Israeli occupation, calling for Palestinian rights, and urging peace. But these resolutions are mostly symbolic. They lack real enforcement. The Security Council is often blocked by U.S. vetoes, and the General Assembly's resolutions are non-binding. Palestine has observer state status in the UN, but isn't recognized as a full member due to political pressure. 5. Global civil movements, the voice of the people. Around the world, civil society movements have played a crucial role in shaping the narrative. The boycott, divestment, sanctions BDS movement urges people to stop supporting companies that profit from the occupation. It's inspired by the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. Protests erupt in cities like London, Paris, New York, Jakarta, and Islamabad whenever major violence occurs in Gaza or the West Bank. Social media has given a new voice to Palestinians, allowing them to share their stories directly with the world. 6. Misinformation and media bias. Global perceptions are also shaped by how media presents the conflict. Some outlets portray it as a clash between equals, ignoring the power imbalance between an occupying force and an occupied people. Others focus on rockets from Gaza, but rarely show the daily struggles of life under siege and occupation. This uneven storytelling causes confusion and misinformation, making it harder for people to understand the real roots of the conflict. 7. The rising global shift. In recent years, there's been a noticeable shift. More people around the world, especially the youth, are questioning the traditional narrative. They are demanding justice, not just peace talks. They want to see freedom for Palestinians, accountability for war crimes, and an end to apartheid policies. The conflict is no longer hidden behind politics. It's in the spotlight. So how does the world see this conflict today? With outrage, division, compassion, and silence all at once. Some support with money and weapons. others with protests and prayers. But ultimately, the real change will only come when the world stops watching and starts acting. The psychological impact on generations, trauma, identity, and resistance. Imagine growing up in a land where the sound of drones replaces the sound of birds, where your childhood games are played in the shadows of checkpoints and broken buildings, where every story your grandparents tell is a memory of what was lost. This is not fiction. This is the emotional and psychological reality of generations raised amidst the Israel-Palestine conflict. 1. Growing up in occupation. A childhood story. In Palestine, children grow up faster than they should. Many witness the arrest of family members, the demolition of their homes, or the loss of loved ones at a very young age. Their drawings often show tanks instead of toys, flags instead of flowers. Their first memories are of freedom, not freedom. Studies by international health organizations show that Palestinian children suffer from PTSD at alarming rates. Some surveys estimate up to 90% of children in Gaza have experienced traumatic events. The psychological impact of this ongoing conflict runs deep. 2. Identity under siege. For many Palestinians, identity becomes a source of both pride and pain. They are taught their history at home because it's often missing from textbooks. They carry the keys to homes their grandparents once lived in, homes they may never see again. Their national identity is constantly challenged, erased from maps, and even denied in international forums. This results in a deep sense of alienation, but also a powerful sense of resistance. To say, "I am Palestinian," becomes a form of political defiance. 3. The impact on Israeli youth. On the other side, Israeli children are also shaped by conflict. Many grow up under the fear of rocket sirens and air raid drills. They are raised with a strong sense of national defense and survival, often drafted into the military at age 18. However, some young Israelis question the occupation. Groups like Breaking the Silence feature former soldiers who speak out against the military's actions in Palestine. This shows that trauma and identity affect both sides, but in very different ways. 4. Resistance through art and culture. Palestinians have found powerful ways to channel their pain into purpose. Graffiti, poetry, rap music, and short films have become tools of resistance and storytelling. Artists like Naji Ali, with his famous cartoon character Nakba, and poets like Mahmoud Darwish gave voice to millions. These cultural expressions do more than protest. They preserve identity, educate the world, and heal the soul. 5. The role of memory and storytelling. In every Palestinian home, memory is sacred. The stories of the Nakba are passed down from generation to generation. Family trees are kept alive, old house keys are treasured, and the names of lost villages are never forgotten. Even in exile, these memories become a form of return. They create a psychological connection to the land, even when physical return seems impossible. 6. Psychological resistance. Holding on to hope. Living under constant threat can break the human spirit. But in Palestine, you'll also find a quiet form of resistance. Hope. The act of planting olive trees, of rebuilding homes again and again, of sending children to school despite the dangers. These are all symbols of survival. They are statements that say, we are still here, and we are not giving up. 7. Global solidarity as emotional support. When people around the world raise Palestinian flags, chant in protests, or share their stories, it gives emotional strength to those living in conflict zones. Knowing that their pain is seen and their voices are heard matters deeply. For generations growing up in this struggle, that sense of global solidarity helps fight the psychological battle of isolation. Jerusalem, the city at the heart of the conflict. Jerusalem, a city that has witnessed thousands of years of history, prophecy, empires, and wars. But today, it stands divided, claimed, contested, and deeply symbolic for both Palestinians and Israelis. Why does Jerusalem matter so much in this conflict? 1. A city of faith. Sacred to three religions, Jerusalem is holy to Muslims, Christians, and Jews alike. For Muslims, it's home to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in Islam. For Jews, it holds the Western Wall, the last remnant of the ancient Jewish temple. For Christians, it is where Jesus walked, was crucified, and resurrected. This shared sacredness should unite, but instead, it has become a point of intense division. 2. East Jerusalem and the 1967 War. In the 1967 Six-Day War, Israel captured East Jerusalem from Jordan. Since then, it has been under Israeli control, despite international laws considering East Jerusalem as occupied territory. Israel later declared Jerusalem as its undivided capital, a move not recognized by the majority of the world. Meanwhile, Palestinians see East Jerusalem as the future capital of their state. This clash of claims has made peace negotiations incredibly difficult. 3. Settlements, evictions, and tensions. In recent decades, Jewish settlements have expanded around East Jerusalem. Palestinian families have faced evictions, most famously in areas like Sheikh Jarrah. These evictions are often legally justified by Israel using old Ottoman or British era property laws. But for many Palestinians, it's not about paperwork. It's about losing homes, being uprooted, and watching their neighborhoods change in front of their eyes. 4. Al-Aqsa Mosque and repeated clashes. The Al-Aqsa compound, known to Jews as the Temple Mount, has become a flashpoint of conflict. Israeli forces and Palestinian worshippers have clashed here many times, especially during Ramadan or political protests. These incidents spark international outrage, often spreading unrest across the West Bank, Gaza, and even globally. 5. Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. In 2017, U.S. President Donald Trump officially recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moved the U.S. Embassy there. This move was celebrated in Israel, but deeply condemned by Palestinians and much of the international community. They saw it as a one-sided decision that ignored Palestinian rights and further complicated the peace process. 6. Identity, access, and the wall. Today, Palestinians in East Jerusalem live in a difficult situation. Many are given permanent resident status, not full citizenship. They face challenges in accessing education, healthcare, building permits, and even freedom of movement due to security checkpoints and the Israeli separation wall. Despite living in Jerusalem for generations, their existence in the city is increasingly fragile. 7. The emotional center of the struggle, Jerusalem is not just a city. It is a symbol of identity, resistance, faith, and loss. When Palestinians say, Jerusalem is ours, they speak not just of land, but of memory, spirituality, and survival. When Israeli leaders call it the eternal capital, they speak of ancient history and national pride. It is this emotional weight that makes Jerusalem the most difficult puzzle in any peace agreement. 8. Can Jerusalem ever be shared? Some peace proposals have suggested making Jerusalem a shared capital or creating international oversight for the holy sites. But on both sides, there is deep mistrust, religious passion, and historical trauma. And yet, without a just solution for Jerusalem, the conflict may never truly end. Media narratives, censorship, and the fight for truth. In today's world, battles aren't just fought with weapons, they're also fought with words, images, and information. The Israel-Palestine conflict is a powerful example of how media narratives shape global opinion and sometimes distort the truth. But who controls these narratives? And what role do censorship and bias play? 1. The power of media and conflict. Every war has two sides. But in the digital age, each side also tries to win hearts and minds by controlling what the world sees and hears. Images of destroyed buildings, crying children, rocket trails, or burning cities, they spread instantly. But who took the image? Who posted it? And what story is it trying to tell? 2. Western media and bias accusations. Many Palestinians and their supporters argue that Western media often shows a pro-Israel bias. Headlines often read, "Israel responds to rocket fire," instead of "Israel bombs Gaza." The language used in news reports subtly shifts the narrative, making one side seem more defensive and justified, and the other more aggressive or dangerous. Even in moments of tragedy, such as the bombing of civilian areas, the headlines can be vague or sanitized, avoiding clear attribution of blame. 3. Social media, a new battlefield. Platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok have become powerful tools for activists, especially Palestinians, to share raw, on-the-ground stories. But these platforms also face accusations of censorship. Dozens of Palestinian accounts have been shadow banned, had content removed, or been suspended entirely for violating guidelines, often without clear explanation. Hashtags like #FreePalestine have trended worldwide, but so have attempts to suppress or manipulate those trends. 4. Misinformation and fake news. In a conflict so deep and emotional, misinformation spreads fast. Old videos resurface with new captions. Unverified claims go viral. Both sides have been accused of spreading propaganda to win international support. This confusion makes it harder for people around the world to understand the reality, and easier for governments and media to push selective truths. 5. Journalists on the front lines. Brave Palestinian journalists and photographers risk their lives to document the destruction, arrests, and daily struggles of their people. But many have been attacked, jailed, or even killed while reporting. In 2022, Shireen Abu Akleh, a respected Palestinian-American journalist, was shot dead while covering an Israeli military operation in the West Bank. Her death sparked global outrage, but justice remains elusive. 6. The fight for narrative domination. Israel has invested heavily in media relations, public diplomacy, and social media campaigns. It frequently uses the words self-defense, terrorist, and security threat in its official statements. On the other hand, Palestinian voices emphasize occupation, resistance, and freedom. These narratives clash in newsrooms, on screens, and in the minds of people around the world. 7. Youth voices and the digital revolution. A new generation of Palestinians, many born under occupation, are using smartphones to document their reality in real time. They create videos, vlogs, infographics, and live streams that go viral and reach millions. This digital resistance is changing the way people see the conflict, breaking through walls of misinformation and censorship. 8. Why the narrative matters. Because in politics and war, perception is everything. The way a story is told can influence foreign aid, diplomatic decisions, public protests, and even international law. That's why each side fights not just for land, but for the right to tell their story. And for Palestinians who have often been silenced or misrepresented, reclaiming their voice is part of their struggle for justice. The role of religion, faith or fuel for conflict. Religion is not just a backdrop in the Israel-Palestine conflict. It's one of the most powerful forces that shapes identity, claims, and emotions on both sides. But is religion the cause of the conflict? or has it been used as a tool to divide and dominate? Let's dive into the deep spiritual roots of this land and how faith plays a double-edged role in this struggle. 1. A land sacred to all. The land known historically as Palestine and now partially called Israel is sacred to three major religions. Islam. Muslims revere Jerusalem as the third holiest site after Mecca and Medina. Al-Aqsa Mosque, located in the Old City, holds deep spiritual meaning. Christianity. This is the land where Jesus lived, preached, and was crucified. Bethlehem, Nazareth, and Jerusalem are central to Christian heritage. Judaism. Jews believe it to be the promised land, gifted to them by God. Jerusalem is home to the Western Wall, one of Judaism's holiest places. Three faiths, one land, all with deep historical connections. But over time, what was once a shared reverence has become a battleground. 2. Zionism and religious claims. The modern political movement of Zionism began in the late 1800s. Its goal? To create a Jewish homeland in what was then Ottoman-controlled Palestine. While early Zionists were largely secular, religious claims were used to justify expansion, with some quoting the Bible to assert divine entitlement. Phrases like "God promised us this land" have been used in political speeches, turning ancient scriptures into modern policy tools. This has raised serious concerns, especially among Palestinians, both Muslim and Christian, who see this as a dangerous misuse of religion to legitimize occupation and displacement. 3. Al-Aqsa Mosque, a flashpoint of faith. Located in East Jerusalem, Al-Aqsa Mosque has often been at the center of intense conflict. Israeli raids on the mosque during Ramadan or other religious periods have sparked global outrage in the Muslim world. For many Palestinians, defending Al-Aqsa is not just about religion, it's about resisting occupation and protecting identity. Every time the mosque is stormed, it reignites deep pain, a reminder that their sacred places are no longer fully in their control. 4. Extremism on both sides. Unfortunately, religion has also been used by extremist groups on both ends to justify violence. Some far-right Israeli settlers claim divine right to expand into Palestinian areas. Some militant Palestinian groups invoke jihad, not just for freedom, but in the name of religion. This turns the conflict into something even more dangerous, not just a fight over land, but a holy war where compromise becomes nearly impossible. 5. Faith as a path to peace. Yet, religion isn't always a weapon. In fact, many rabbis, imams, and priests from both sides are working together to promote peace. They remind people that the true teachings of all three religions promote justice, mercy, and compassion. There are interfaith organizations in Israel and Palestine that bring Jews, Muslims, and Christians together to foster dialogue, understanding, and even friendship. These voices often go unheard, but they prove that religion can be a bridge, not just a barrier. 6. Why this matters? Because for many people around the world, religion is the lens through which they view this conflict. When sacred sites are attacked, or religious holidays are disrupted by violence, it doesn't just affect locals, it sends shockwaves globally. Faith can unite or divide, depending on how it's used. And in the Israel-Palestine conflict, it continues to be both a source of inspiration and a spark for tension. Global reactions. How the world views the conflict. The Israel-Palestine conflict isn't just a regional issue, it's a global flashpoint. Around the world, governments, media outlets, and ordinary people respond in dramatically different ways. But why does this particular conflict grab so much international attention? And how have these responses influenced the situation on the ground? Let's explore how the world sees this long and painful struggle. and how those views have shaped the course of history. 1. The West's uneven support. The U.S. and Europe. Perhaps no outside nation plays a bigger role in this conflict than the United States. Since the mid-20th century, America has been Israel's strongest ally, providing billions in military aid, vetoing UN resolutions critical of Israel, and defending it on the global stage. Why? Part of it comes from strategic interests. Israel is seen as a key ally in the Middle East. Part of it is driven by domestic politics, where strong lobbying groups and public sympathy influence decision-making. Meanwhile, European nations have taken a more mixed stance. Some support Israel's right to exist and defend itself, while others are openly critical of its actions, especially regarding settlements and military operations in Gaza and the West Bank. But across much of the West, the media narrative has often leaned heavily toward Israel's perspective, framing it as the victim of terror rather than the occupier of land. 2. The Muslim world, a voice for Palestine. In contrast, many Muslim-majority countries have consistently stood with the Palestinians, culturally, religiously, and politically. From Turkey to Pakistan, Iran to Indonesia, leaders have spoken out against Israeli actions, especially during wars in Gaza or the desecration of Al-Aqsa mosque. Public protests erupt across these countries when violence flares, not just in support of Palestinians, but as a cry against perceived injustice and hypocrisy in global politics. However, not all Muslim nations act on their outrage. Some governments, despite public support for Palestine, have maintained quiet or even open relations with Israel, often for economic or strategic reasons. 3. The United Nations and international law. The United Nations has passed hundreds of resolutions condemning Israeli settlement activity, calling for the right of return for Palestinian refugees, and urging an end to occupation. But enforcement has been weak. Why? Because powerful nations like the United States have consistently used their veto power in the Security Council to block strong action against Israel. So while the international community largely recognizes Palestinian rights, their actual ability to protect those rights remains limited. 4. Global grassroots movements. A rising tide. In recent years, especially with the rise of social media, grassroots support for Palestine has grown enormously. Movements like BDS boycott, divestment, sanctions have gained traction around the world, calling on individuals and institutions to economically pressure Israel to end occupation and apartheid-like policies. College students, artists, athletes, and activists from countries as far apart as South Africa, the UK, and Brazil have joined the cause. For many, Palestine has become a symbol of resistance, much like apartheid-era South Africa once was. 5. The role of misinformation and propaganda. But with global attention also comes confusion. Both sides use media, traditional and social, to push their narratives. Israeli officials frame their actions as self-defense against terror. Palestinian voices often focus on occupation, human rights abuses, and the struggle for survival. In this information war, truth becomes blurred, and audiences are left unsure whom to believe. This is why historical awareness and critical thinking are so important, because behind every image, there's a deeper story. 6. Why the world watches. So why does this conflict resonate globally? Because it involves universal themes. Justice versus oppression. Identity versus displacement. Religion, land, and the right to live freely. For many, especially in the global south, the Palestinian cause represents a fight against colonialism and imperialism, echoing their own histories of struggle. Meanwhile, for others, especially in the West, support for Israel is tied to security fears, historical guilt, and strategic alliances. Conclusion of this part. In the global arena, the Israel-Palestine conflict is more than a regional fight. It's a mirror reflecting the world's values, biases, and contradictions. As long as the world stays divided in its response, real peace may remain out of reach. The human cost lies lost and future stolen. When we talk about Israel and Palestine, it's easy to get caught up in maps, politics, and history books. But at the heart of this conflict, beyond the borders and headlines, lies a deep and devastating human cost. Behind every statistic is a name. Behind every bombed-out building is a family. And behind every lost life is a future that could have been. 1. Palestinian suffering, generation after generation. For decades, Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank have lived under occupation, restriction, and fear. In Gaza, often described as the largest open-air prison in the world, more than 2 million people are crammed into just 365 square kilometers. They face daily electricity shortages, limited access to clean water, crumbling hospitals and schools, strict border controls that prevent escape or medical help. And when war breaks out, as it has again and again, the majority of casualties are civilians. Many of them are children. Imagine being a parent who puts their children to bed, unsure if they'll wake up to the sound of bombs. Imagine being a child who has never known peace, only drones in the sky. 2. Life in the West Bank. The silent struggle. In the West Bank, Palestinians face a different kind of suffering, a slow, suffocating system of checkpoints, ID cards, and settlement expansion. Farmers can't reach their own land. Families are displaced as settlements expand. Young men are detained without trial. Homes are demolished without warning. It's not a dramatic explosion or headline, but it's the daily erosion of dignity, a slow loss of identity, opportunity, and hope. 3. Psychological trauma. A wound that doesn't heal. What does it do to a person to live under constant fear? Studies have shown that a vast majority of children in Gaza and parts of the West Bank suffer from PTSD, anxiety, and depression. They draw pictures of tanks instead of trees. They recognize the sound of warplanes better than the sound of music. They talk about martyrs instead of dreams. And this trauma doesn't just affect one generation, it's passed down. It becomes part of the collective memory. 4. Israeli lives lost. The other side of pain. To truly understand the human cost, we must also acknowledge the Israeli families who have lost loved ones in rocket attacks, in suicide bombings, in conflicts that never seem to end. Children have been killed. Families have mourned. Communities live in fear and remain silent. The pain is real, and no life, no matter where they're from, should ever be taken lightly. But here's the truth. Violence has not made anyone safer. It has only deepened the hatred, the fear, and the cycle of revenge. 5. Refugees. The lost millions. One of the most heartbreaking legacies of this conflict is the Palestinian refugee crisis. In 1948, nearly 750,000 Palestinians were displaced. Today, their descendants number in the millions, living in refugee camps across Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and other countries. Many have no citizenship, no legal status, no right to return. They grow up with keys around their necks, symbols of homes they may never see again. 6. The cost of silence. The world often stays silent. Or worse, it chooses sides blindly. But every time a government fails to act, every time a media outlet distorts the truth, every time we turn away, pretending it's too complicated, a child dies, a home is lost, a future disappears. Conclusion of this part. The human cost of the Israel-Palestine conflict is not just numbers on a chart. It's pain that lives in hearts, trauma written on faces, and dreams that never came true. Until we recognize this, not as a political issue, but as a human one, real justice will remain our reach. Can there ever be peace? Is peace between Israel and Palestine even possible? After decades of bloodshed, broken promises, and shattered dreams, is there still hope left in the hearts of the people? This question echoes through the history of the Middle East like a haunting melody. But despite the despair, the answer is yes, peace is possible. Not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. 1. The roadblocks to peace. To understand the challenge, we must face the uncomfortable truths. Illegal settlements continue to expand in the West Bank, making a two-state solution more difficult by the day. Jerusalem, a city holy to Jews, Muslims, and Christians alike, remains a source of bitter contention. Displacement of Palestinians, demolitions of homes, and daily restrictions have created generations filled with resentment. Militancy and resistance, including rocket attacks from Gaza, fuel fear and justify retaliation. Add to this a tangled web of political interests, foreign interference, and religious narratives, and peace becomes not just a dream, but a battlefield of its own. 2. What has been tried so far? There have been moments in history that hinted at peace. The Oslo Accords in the 1990s brought Israeli and Palestinian leaders to the table. Camp David Summit tried to bridge the gap, but failed. Ceasefires were agreed, only to collapse under new waves of violence. Each attempt brought a flicker of hope, only to be drowned by bullets and bombs. Why? Because these talks often ignore the voices of the people most affected, the civilians on both sides who crave normalcy, safety, and dignity. 3. Voices of peace. From the ground, amid the rubble, something beautiful grows hope. There are Israeli and Palestinian families working together in grief and solidarity. Organizations like Parents Circle bring together families who've lost loved ones, and they choose peace over revenge. Young people are crossing divides on social media, in protests, in art and education, refusing to inherit hate. One Palestinian girl said, "I don't want revenge. I want to study, to travel, to live." One Israeli boy said, "I'm tired of war. I just want to be safe, and for them to be safe too." 4. What would real peace look like? Peace doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It means acknowledging the pain and history of both sides, recognizing the right of Palestinians to live freely with their own state, identity, and dignity, ensuring the security of Israeli families, free from rockets and fear, bringing justice to those who have lost everything without fueling more hatred. Real peace would allow children in Gaza to play in sunlight instead of hiding in rubble, Jewish and Muslim families to walk through Jerusalem without fear, grandmothers to return to their olive groves, not refugee tents, the world to witness a new chapter, one not written in blood, but in hope. 5. The role of the world. The world can no longer be a passive observer. Nations must stop funding injustice. The media must stop spreading one-sided stories. Ordinary people, like you and me, must speak up, because silence is not neutral. It sides with the oppressor, and it allows suffering to continue unchecked. Final thoughts. Yes, peace is possible. Not because politicians make it so, but because people demand it. It begins with truth. It grows with justice. And it survives through the courage of those who dare to believe in a better tomorrow. The question isn't, can there be peace? The real question is, what are we willing to do to make it happen?